Episode 6. The Great Bach Dang Battle. The song of triumph dawned over the Bach Dang River did not shine like the dawn of peaceful days. It rose behind a thin veil of cold mist, casting a silver-gray light across the water like a sword still resting inside its sheath. Along both riverbanks, the forest stood unnaturally silent. There were no birds, no human voices, no sound of or striking the water. Only the tide moved quietly, rising layer by layer over the muddy flats, slowly concealing the sharpened wooden stakes that the soldiers and people of Viet had driven deep into the riverbed over many sleepless days and nights. Beneath the water lay an entire field of death, but on the surface, the river remained calm, as if nothing had ever happened. Ngo Quyen stood on a high bank overlooking the river, his dark cloak shifting gently in the morning wind. Before him stretched the rising waters of Bach Dang. Behind him, hidden deep inside the forests, thousands of archers, naval soldiers, and infantrymen had been waiting since before sunrise. No fires were allowed. No voices were allowed. Every soldier understood that even the smallest sound could expose the strategy their commander had built with intelligence, sweat, and the fate of the nation itself. Dung Tam Ka stepped quietly beside Ngo Quyen and lowered his voice. "My lord, the tide is rising exactly as predicted. The stake field is completely submerged. Our ambush forces on both riverbanks are in position." Ngo Quyen did not take his eyes off the river. "Are the light boats ready?" "They are ready. They await only your command." Ngo Quyen nodded slightly. His face remained calm, but a deep fire burned behind his eyes. This was no longer a battle of revenge. This was the battle that would decide whether an entire country lived or fell. If they failed, the Southern Han Army would follow this river into the heart of the land. Dai La, newly reclaimed, could once again drown in fire. All the bloodshed to remove internal traitors would become meaningless. But if they won, from this day forward, the North would understand that this land could no longer be invaded at will. From the river mouth, a long war horn suddenly echoed through the mist. Everyone hidden in the forest held their breath. Far away, dark sails began to appear on the water. At first, they were only small black shapes within the fog. Then, one after another, they grew clearer, huge, heavy, towering like wooden mountains drifting into the river. Southern Han banners snapped in the wind. On the decks, armored soldiers stood proudly in formation, holding long spears. The war drums of the fleet struck against the forested banks with arrogant force. At the front of the fleet sailed the largest warship. On its bow stood Lu Hongqiao, arms folded, eyes fixed on the river ahead. He was young, proud, and filled with the confidence of a man who had never tasted defeat. To him, this southern land was only a weakened territory torn apart by recent disorder. Once the Southern Han fleet entered, he believed every fortress, every village, every local army would collapse before the power of his enormous warships. A general stepped beside him. "Your Highness, ahead is the mouth of the Bach Dang River. The tide is very high. Our large ships can move deep inside." Lu Hongqiao smiled. "Then move in. I want Ngo Quyen captured before sunset." The general hesitated. "But the forests on both banks are thick. There may be an ambush." Lu Hongqiao turned toward him with cold eyes. "An ambush? What can a group of men weakened by internal war possibly do? Hio Tsung Tien may have been useless, but his death must have weakened them. If Ngo Quyen is wise, he will kneel and surrender. If he dares appear before me, I will crush him on this very river." The command drums thundered. The Southern Han fleet began sailing deeper into the Bach Dang River. On the riverbank, Ngo Quyen quietly watched every movement. When the first enemy ship passed safely above the hidden stake field, some of the younger soldiers concealed in the forest grew tense. They knew that beneath the water lay thousands of iron-tipped stakes, but now the tide was high, covering them completely. The enemy ships passed over them smoothly, as if the river itself were welcoming them forward. Dung Tam Ka looked at Ngo Quyen. "My lord, they have entered the field." "No," Quyen answered slowly, "not deep enough." His eyes shifted toward the light Vietnamese boats hidden behind a bend in the river. Those were the men chosen to lure the enemy. They knew their task was the most dangerous of all. They had to appear before the Southern Han fleet, provoke them, then pretend to lose and flee. If they ran too early, the enemy would suspect a trap. If they ran too late, they could be crushed by the massive warships. Every stroke of their oars would move between life and death. Ngo Quyen raised his hand. A small signal flag immediately rose from the forest. Moments later, dozens of light Vietnamese boats shot out from a narrow river branch like arrows tearing through the mist. Small war drums beat rapidly. Warriors aboard the boats shouted and fired the first volleys of arrows toward the Southern Han fleet. Arrows sliced across the water. Several struck the sides of enemy ships. One Southern Han soldier was hit and fell onto the deck. A small wave of confusion spread among the front line of vessels. Lu Hongqiao watched the scene and laughed. "Is that all?" He drew his sword and pointed forward. "Chase them. Crush those little boats." The Southern Han drums roared like thunder. The huge warships immediately accelerated. Oars struck the water with violent rhythm. Large waves surged behind them. The Vietnamese light boats fired several more volleys, then suddenly turned and fled deeper into the river. On one of the light boats, a young captain shouted, "Pretend to retreat. Hold formation. Do not let them catch us too soon." The oars beat harder. The Vietnamese boats were small, fast, and familiar with the river's hidden routes. Behind them, the Southern Han fleet thundered forward in pursuit. The distance between hunter and prey narrowed and widened again, close enough to feed the enemy's arrogance, but never close enough for them to strike. Ngo Quyen stood on the bank, his eyes locked on the water. The tide was still high. The enemy was still moving deeper. The stake field was still sleeping beneath the river. And the greatest trap in history was slowly closing.